The autumn wind rustled through the trees as 7-year-old Tommy clutched his Pokemon backpack tightly against his chest. Something felt different about this afternoon's bus ride home. Mrs. Wilson, the regular bus driver who had been driving the route for 15 years, was absent today. In her place sat Mr. Reynolds, a substitute driver with cold eyes and an unfamiliar scowl. Tommy had only been riding the bus for 3 months since starting 2nd grade, but he knew his stop well, the corner of Pine Street and Maple Avenue, right by the old oak tree where his mom always waited for him. But today, as the bus rumbled past unfamiliar streets, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. The other children slowly filtered out at their usual stops, their laughter and chatter fading with each departure. Tommy watched anxiously as the streets became less and less familiar. When he was the last child left on the bus, he gathered his courage and spoke up in a small voice, "Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds? I think we passed my stop." The driver's eyes met Tommy's in the rearview mirror, a strange glint reflecting in them. "No, we didn't," he replied curtly, continuing to drive into an area of town Tommy had never seen before. The buildings here were different, older, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. Fear began to creep up Tommy's spine as he realized something was very wrong. His mom had taught him about stranger danger and what to do in scary situations. With trembling hands, he reached for the cell phone she had given him for emergencies, which was tucked safely in his backpack's front pocket. But before he could grasp it, the bus lurched to a sudden stop in front of an abandoned warehouse. "This is your new stop," Mr. Reynolds announced, his voice eerily calm as he stood up and turned to face Tommy. The 7-year-old's heart pounded in his chest as he remembered his mom's words, "If you ever feel unsafe, trust your instincts." In that moment, as Mr. Reynolds started walking down the aisle toward him, Tommy made a split-second decision that would change everything. He grabbed his backpack, rushed to the emergency exit at the back of the bus, and pulled the red handle just as he'd been taught during safety drills at school. The door swung open with a loud hiss, and Tommy jumped out without hesitation. His feet hit the ground running, adrenaline coursing through his small body. He could hear Mr. Reynolds shouting behind him, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Tommy darted between the warehouses, his mind racing to remember another of his mom's lessons, find a public place with lots of people. Through gaps in the buildings, he spotted what looked like a busy street in the distance. His lungs burned as he ran faster than he ever had before, even faster than during field day at school. Behind him, the footsteps grew fainter, but Tommy didn't dare look back. As he emerged onto the main street, he nearly collided with Officer Chen, who was walking out of a coffee shop. The police officer immediately recognized the panic in the boy's eyes and crouched down to his level. Through gasping breaths, Tommy managed to explain about the bus driver and the wrong stop. Officer Chen quickly radioed for backup while keeping Tommy safe inside the coffee shop. The events that followed would reveal a disturbing pattern. Mr. Reynolds wasn't really a substitute driver at all. He had forged documents to gain access to the school bus, and Tommy wasn't his first attempted target. Thanks to Tommy's quick thinking and bravery, the police were able to apprehend Mr. Reynolds before he could leave the area. The investigation would later uncover evidence linking him to several other attempted abductions in neighboring counties. But more importantly, Tommy's story would lead to enhanced security measures for school bus driver verification across the entire state. In the days that followed, Tommy became known as the brave little boy who not only saved himself but potentially many other children too. The school held a special assembly to honor his quick thinking and to reinforce safety protocols for all students. His mom, who had always emphasized the importance of being prepared and trusting one's instincts, held him extra tight each night, grateful that her lessons had helped keep her son safe. The community rallied together, implementing new safety measures for school transportation. Every bus now required two-factor authentication for drivers, and GPS tracking systems were installed in all school vehicles. Parents organized a buddy system for bus stops, ensuring no child ever waited alone. Tommy's experience had transformed him. Though still cautious, he had discovered an inner strength he never knew he possessed. He began sharing his story with other children, teaching them about safety and the importance of trusting their instincts. What started as a terrifying ordeal had become a powerful lesson that would protect countless other young lives. Mrs. Wilson returned to her route the following week, greeting each child with her warm smile and kind eyes. For Tommy, the familiar sight of her behind the wheel meant more than just a ride home. It represented safety, security, and the comfort of knowing that sometimes the scariest moments in life can lead to positive change for an entire community. The story of Tommy's brave escape quickly spread beyond the local community, catching the attention of child safety advocates and news outlets across the country. But what happened in the weeks following the incident would reveal an even more shocking truth about the system that had allowed Mr. Reynolds to slip through the cracks. Detective Lisa Rodriguez sat at her desk, poring over the growing pile of evidence. The false documents Mr. Reynolds had used weren't just simple forgeries, they were sophisticated enough to fool multiple school districts. As she dug deeper, she discovered a disturbing network of individuals who had been helping potential predators infiltrate schools and transportation systems across multiple states. Meanwhile, Tommy was adjusting to his newfound attention. His mom had been protective at first, wanting to keep him away from the publicity, but Tommy insisted on sharing his story. "If it helps keep other kids safe, I want to tell them what happened," he said during a meeting with school officials. His simple words carried more weight than any adult's carefully crafted speech. The school board called an emergency meeting to address the security breach. Parents packed the gymnasium, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger and concern. Tommy's mom stood up to speak, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "Our children's safety isn't just about having rules on paper," she said. "It's about creating a system where those rules can't be broken." Back at the police station, Detective Rodriguez made a breakthrough. Mr. Reynolds' phone records revealed connections to a sophisticated criminal organization that had been targeting schools in 5 different states. They didn't just forge documents, they created entire false identities complete with fake references and background checks that could pass initial scrutiny. The investigation expanded rapidly. FBI agents joined local law enforcement, setting up a command center in the town's police headquarters. Tommy's quick thinking hadn't just saved him, it had provided the crucial lead they needed to uncover a criminal enterprise that had been operating undetected for years. In the midst of this whirlwind, Tommy returned to school. His classmates treated him differently now, not with fear or pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. During recess, younger students would gather around him, listening intently as he shared what he'd learned about staying safe. "Always trust that feeling in your stomach," he'd tell them, "the one that tells you something isn't right." The school counselor noticed something remarkable happening. Students who had previously been too shy or scared to speak up about uncomfortable situations were finding their voices. Tommy's story had given them permission to trust their instincts and seek help when needed. One morning, as Tommy boarded Mrs. Wilson's bus, she handed him a small package wrapped in bright paper. Inside was a junior safety officer badge, custom-made by the local police department. "For the boy who reminded us that heroes come in all sizes," the note read. Tommy pinned it to his backpack, not as a symbol of pride, but as a reminder of responsibility. The investigation continued to expand. Detective Rodriguez discovered that the criminal network had attempted to place fake drivers in at least 12 different school districts. Thanks to the evidence trail leading from Mr. Reynolds, law enforcement was able to identify and remove 3 other imposters before they could harm any children. Tommy's mom started a parent advocacy group focused on transportation safety. They worked with technology companies to develop an app that would allow parents to track their children's bus routes in real time and verify the identity of drivers. The prototype was named Tommy's Guardian, in honor of the brave little boy who had sparked its creation. The story reached state legislators, who began drafting new laws to strengthen background checks and monitoring systems for school personnel. They called it the Safe Routes Act, and invited Tommy to speak at the state capitol. Standing at the podium, looking much smaller than the microphone in front of him, he spoke from his heart. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Local businesses joined the effort, offering free self-defense classes for children and parents. The coffee shop where Tommy had found Officer Chen started a Safe Haven program, training their staff to respond to children in distress and placing prominent signs in their windows identifying them as safe spaces for kids who felt threatened. The media attention brought forward others who had encountered similar situations but had been too afraid to speak up. Each new story added another piece to the puzzle, helping law enforcement understand how the criminal network operated and leading to more arrests. Tommy's school implemented new educational programs focusing on personal safety and emergency preparedness. Rather than frightening children with worst-case scenarios, they emphasized building confidence and trust in their own judgment. Tommy often helped demonstrate safety techniques, showing his peers how to use emergency exits and teaching them the importance of having a plan. As winter approached and the days grew shorter, the changes sparked by Tommy's experience had created a ripple effect throughout the community. Bus stops were now monitored by parent volunteers, and children traveled in buddy groups. The fear that had initially gripped the town had transformed into a powerful sense of unity and purpose. Mrs. Wilson noticed another change in her young passengers. They were more alert, more aware of their surroundings, but not fearful. They looked out for each other, making sure everyone got off at the right stop and reporting anything unusual. The bus had become more than just transportation. It was a rolling community where children felt safe and protected. The investigation into Mr. Reynolds' activities had taken an unexpected turn. Detective Rodriguez sat at her desk, reviewing security footage from various schools across the state. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. Mr. Reynolds hadn't been working alone. The forged documents he'd used had come from a sophisticated operation that had been targeting school districts for months. Meanwhile, Tommy's story had caught the attention of child safety organizations nationwide. His quick thinking and brave actions were being used as a teaching tool in schools across the country. But it wasn't just his escape that was making waves, it was how the community had rallied together in response to the incident. The local police department had established a new youth safety division, headed by Officer Chen. She had taken Tommy's experience to heart and developed innovative programs to help children feel more comfortable approaching law enforcement. Sometimes the best solutions come from listening to our youngest citizens, she would say during training sessions. Tommy's school had undergone significant changes. The principal had worked with security experts to install new surveillance systems, but more importantly, they had created a student-led safety committee. Tommy, though initially hesitant, had become an active member. His experience had given him unique insights into what children needed to feel secure. One morning, during a safety committee meeting, a sixth grader named Amy shared a concerning observation. She had noticed a car repeatedly parked near the school bus stops in her neighborhood. Thanks to the new awareness protocols inspired by Tommy's experience, she knew to report it immediately. The police investigation revealed another potential threat had been thwarted before it could develop. Detective Rodriguez's investigation had led her to a startling discovery. The criminal network hadn't just been targeting their town, they had operations in multiple states. The forged documents found in Mr. Reynolds' possession had originated from a sophisticated counterfeiting operation that specialized in creating false credentials for school employees. Tommy's mom had started a support group for parents whose children had experienced similar situations. What began as a small gathering in her living room had grown into a nationwide network. They shared resources, supported each other, and worked together to advocate for stronger safety measures in schools across the country. Mrs. Wilson, the regular bus driver who had been absent that fateful day, had turned her experience into a mission. She now conducted training sessions for other bus drivers, teaching them how to spot suspicious behavior and respond to potential threats. Her programs emphasized the importance of building trust with students so they would feel comfortable reporting concerns. The coffee shop where Tommy had found refuge had become a symbol of community safety. The owner had started a Safe Haven program, training local businesses to provide secure spaces for children in distress. Bright yellow signs began appearing in shop windows throughout the town, marking them as safe spaces where kids could seek help. Tommy's experience had sparked a technological revolution in school transportation safety. Local tech companies had collaborated to develop a mobile app that allowed parents to track their children's bus routes in real time. The app, still in its testing phase, would alert parents to any unauthorized route changes or delays. The criminal investigation continued to expand. Each new piece of evidence uncovered by Detective Rodriguez revealed more connections. The network had been particularly clever in how they operated, using temporary staffing agencies and fake references to place their people in schools. But their careful planning hadn't accounted for one thing: the courage of a 7-year-old boy. Tommy had started having regular sessions with the school counselor, not because he was traumatized, but because he wanted to help other kids feel safer. Together, they developed a program to teach students about trusting their instincts and seeking help when something didn't feel right. His simple message resonated with his peers: being scared is okay, it's what you do when you're scared that matters. The local government had taken notice of the community's response to the incident. They fast-tracked legislation requiring stricter background checks for all school personnel, including temporary and contract workers. The new law, unofficially known as Tommy's Law, would make it much harder for anyone to slip through the cracks in the system. Detective Rodriguez's office walls were covered with evidence photos and connection maps. The investigation had grown beyond anything she had initially imagined. But among all the complex criminal networks and sophisticated schemes, she kept a simple drawing on her desk, a thank you card from Tommy, featuring a crayon drawing of a police badge and the words, "Thank you for helping keep us safe." As weeks turned into months, the changes in the community became more permanent. Bus stops were no longer just meeting points, they had become mini-communities where parents took turns keeping watch. Children walked in groups, looking out for each other with a new awareness that balanced caution with confidence. The story had attracted national media attention, but Tommy's mom was careful to protect her son from too much exposure. She knew that the most important thing was maintaining a sense of normalcy in his life. Still, she couldn't help but feel proud when she overheard him teaching younger students about safety during recess, using his experience to help others stay protected. The winter snow had begun to melt when Detective Rodriguez received an urgent call from the FBI. The investigation into Mr. Reynolds' criminal network had uncovered something unprecedented, a sophisticated digital infrastructure that had been operating undetected for years. Tommy's escape hadn't just exposed one dangerous individual, it had cracked open the largest school transportation security breach in history. In the months since the incident, Tommy's school had become a model for student safety nationwide. The student-led safety committee had developed innovative protocols that were being adopted by schools across the country. Their most successful initiative was a peer support system where older students helped younger ones learn about personal safety through games and role-playing exercises. Officer Chen's Youth Safety Division had expanded beyond all expectations. What started as a local program had caught the attention of police departments nationwide. She had created a training curriculum that helped officers build better relationships with young people in their communities. "Children are our best allies in creating safer neighborhoods," she would tell her fellow officers. Tommy's mom had transformed her living room support group into a registered nonprofit organization. The Safe Routes Foundation now provided resources and advocacy for families across the country. They had successfully lobbied for legislation requiring enhanced background checks and real-time monitoring of school transportation personnel in several states. One morning, during a routine safety committee meeting, a third grader named Lee shared something interesting. He had noticed that some of the safety protocols they had developed were helping kids feel more confident in other areas of their lives. The buddy system hadn't just made the bus ride safer, it had created new friendships and reduced bullying throughout the school. Detective Rodriguez's investigation had led to a breakthrough in cybersecurity. The criminal network had been using sophisticated software to create false credentials that could pass most background checks. This discovery prompted a complete overhaul of how schools verified their employees' identities. Tech companies were now working together to develop blockchain-based verification systems that would be nearly impossible to forge. Mrs. Wilson had taken her bus driver training program national. She traveled to different school districts, sharing her expertise and helping implement new safety measures. Her simple but effective approach emphasized building relationships with students and creating an environment where they felt comfortable speaking up about their concerns. The Safe Haven program, started by the coffee shop owner, had spread to neighboring towns. Businesses underwent special training to become certified safe spaces for children in distress. The bright yellow signs in their windows had become symbols of community protection, reminding everyone that safety was a shared responsibility. Tommy's experience had inspired technological innovations beyond the bus tracking app. Local developers had created a digital ID system for school personnel that updated in real time and couldn't be forged. The system, still in its testing phase at Tommy's school, would soon be implemented across the state. The criminal investigation had revealed another disturbing trend: the network had been targeting small, rural school districts where security measures were often less stringent. This discovery led to the creation of a special task force dedicated to protecting vulnerable school systems. They provided resources and training to communities that might otherwise have been easy targets. Tommy had started working with child psychologists to develop age-appropriate safety education materials. His personal experience, combined with his natural ability to connect with his peers, made him uniquely qualified to help other children understand the importance of trusting their instincts. "Sometimes your stomach knows something's wrong before your head does," he would tell them. The local government's response to the incident had evolved into a comprehensive child safety initiative. They had established a dedicated department for school transportation security, with powers to conduct random audits and investigate suspicious activities. The program was already being studied by other states as a model for protecting student safety. Detective Rodriguez had set up a special hotline for reporting suspicious activities around schools. The tip line had already helped prevent several potential incidents, thanks to alert community members who had noticed unusual patterns. Each successful intervention reinforced the importance of community vigilance. The media coverage of Tommy's story had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of focusing on the fear and danger, reporters were highlighting the positive changes that had emerged from the incident. Stories about communities coming together, students looking out for each other, and innovative safety programs were inspiring similar initiatives across the country. As spring approached, the changes in the community were evident in countless small ways. Parents chatted and shared updates at bus stops, creating informal neighborhood watch networks. Children walked with confidence, knowing they were part of a community that looked out for them. Bus rides had become social experiences where students practiced awareness while building friendships. The story had caught the attention of national education experts who were studying how the community's response could serve as a model for other schools. They were particularly impressed by how the safety measures had been implemented without creating an atmosphere of fear. Instead, the focus on community involvement and student empowerment had created a positive environment where children felt protected and valued. As spring bloomed across the city, the impact of Tommy's story continued to grow in unexpected ways. A national conference on child safety was being held downtown, and Tommy had been invited as a special guest speaker. His mom watched proudly from the front row as her son, now more confident than ever, took the stage to address a room full of educators, law enforcement officials, and safety experts. "I was just a kid who got scared and ran," Tommy began, his voice clear and steady. "But my mom always told me that being scared is okay, it's what you do when you're scared that matters." The audience hung on every word as He shared his story, not just of escape, but of how it had changed his community. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez was making significant progress in dismantling the criminal network. The investigation had uncovered a sophisticated operation that extended far beyond fake bus drivers. They had infiltrated several other positions within school systems across the country: cafeteria workers, janitors, and even substitute teachers. Each new discovery reinforced the importance of Tommy's initial escape and the subsequent investigation it had triggered. Back at Tommy's school, the changes were evident in both big and small ways. The newly implemented buddy system had created unexpected friendships among students who might never have connected otherwise. Older students took their roles as protectors seriously, walking younger kids to their buses and helping them remember safety protocols. One particularly touching development involved a quiet third grader named Raj, who had recently moved to the country. Initially struggling to adjust and barely speaking to anyone, he found his voice after hearing Tommy's story during a school assembly. Raj approached Tommy during lunch one day and shared how he had felt unsafe at his old school but had been too afraid to tell anyone. Tommy's experience gave him the courage to open up to his parents and teachers about bullying he had experienced. The local police department had taken the lessons learned from Tommy's case and developed a comprehensive new training program for officers. Officer Chen, who had helped Tommy that fateful day, led workshops teaching law enforcement personnel how to better interact with children in crisis situations. "Sometimes the biggest breakthrough in a case comes from listening to our smallest citizens," she would say during her presentations. Tommy's mom had become an influential voice in child safety advocacy. She worked tirelessly with other parents to develop new protocols for school transportation safety. Their efforts led to the creation of a revolutionary mobile app that allowed real-time tracking of school buses and instant verification of driver identities. The app, now in its testing phase, was set to be implemented in school districts across the state. The criminal network that Mr. Reynolds had been part of was gradually being exposed and dismantled. Each arrest brought new information, leading to more protective measures being put in place. The investigation had expanded to include international connections, revealing how these criminals had been operating across borders to forge documents and create false identities. One afternoon, as Tommy rode home on Mrs. Wilson's bus, he noticed something different. The other kids weren't just passengers anymore, they were active participants in their own safety. They checked their surroundings, kept track of each other, and maintained a friendly but vigilant atmosphere. Mrs. Wilson had implemented a Safety Buddy of the Week program, where students took turns helping her ensure everyone got off at the right stops. The media coverage of Tommy's story had inspired other communities to examine their own school transportation systems. Reports came in from across the country of schools implementing similar safety measures, creating a ripple effect of positive change. Some districts had even started student-led safety committees, empowering children to take an active role in their own protection. Detective Rodriguez's investigation led to an unexpected discovery: several technology companies had been unknowingly providing services to the criminal network. Upon learning this, these companies joined forces to create a non-profit organization dedicated to developing better background verification systems. They named their first initiative Project Lighthouse, inspired by Tommy's description of how he had looked for bright, public places during his escape. The story took another turn when international law enforcement agencies began sharing information about similar cases in other countries. Tommy's experience had helped expose a global problem, and his brave actions were now contributing to worldwide efforts to protect children during their school commutes. At home, Tommy was still processing everything that had happened. His mom noticed that while he had grown more serious in some ways, he had also developed a deeper sense of compassion. He spent time helping younger children overcome their fears of riding the bus, sharing his experience in ways they could understand and learn from. The school year was drawing to a close, and the changes triggered by Tommy's experience had become permanently woven into the fabric of the community. The emergency protocols he had used that day were now taught in schools across the country, and his story had become a powerful teaching tool for child safety educators. One particular moment stood out during this period. A group of first graders had created a thank you card for Tommy, covered in colorful drawings of buses and safety badges. Inside, in wobbly handwriting, they had written, "Thank you for making our ride safe." This simple message perhaps best captured the lasting impact of Tommy's courage, not just in exposing a criminal network, but in creating an environment where children felt protected and empowered. Summer was approaching, but the momentum of change sparked by Tommy's experience showed no signs of slowing down. The Safe Routes Act had passed unanimously in the state legislature, and other states were rushing to adopt similar measures. What had started as one boy's terrifying encounter had evolved into a nationwide movement for student safety. Detective Rodriguez received an unexpected call one morning from Interpol. The investigation into the criminal network had uncovered links to similar operations in Europe and Asia. Tommy's case had become the key that unlocked a global investigation. Law enforcement agencies worldwide were now sharing information and resources to protect children during their school commutes. The Tommy's Guardian app was proving to be a game-changer. During its first month of testing, it had already helped identify 2 suspicious individuals attempting to gain access to school transportation systems in neighboring states. Parents could now track their children's bus routes in real time, receive instant notifications of any route changes, and verify driver identities with a simple scan. Tommy's mom had been invited to speak at a United Nations conference on child safety. As she prepared for her presentation, she found herself reflecting on how far they'd come from that terrifying afternoon when Tommy hadn't gotten off at his regular stop. The fear that had gripped her heart that day had transformed into a powerful force for change. Back at school, the buddy system had evolved into something even more meaningful. Older students had started a mentorship program, teaching younger kids about safety through games and role-playing exercises. They called themselves the Safety Scouts, and membership had become a badge of honor among the students. One particularly touching development involved a former victim of a similar incident who had reached out to Tommy's family. The woman, now in her 30s, shared how she had carried the weight of her experience alone for years. Tommy's story had given her the courage to finally speak out, leading to the resolution of a 20-year-old cold case and providing closure for several families. Officer Chen's training program for law enforcement had gained national recognition. Police departments across the country were adopting her methods for handling cases involving children. She always started her sessions by playing the security camera footage from the coffee shop where Tommy had found her that day, using it to demonstrate the importance of being approachable and trustworthy to children in crisis. The investigation had led to an unexpected discovery. Several technology companies had been unknowingly providing services to the criminal network. Upon learning this, these companies joined forces to create a non-profit organization dedicated to developing better background verification systems. They named their first initiative Project Lighthouse, inspired by Tommy's description of how he had looked for bright, public places during his escape. Mrs. Wilson's bus had become a model for school transportation safety. She had implemented a series of subtle but effective changes, like having older students sit near the younger ones and teaching all her passengers a simple code word that meant they needed help. Other bus drivers from around the state would visit to learn from her methods. Tommy's school had received a grant to develop a comprehensive safety curriculum based on the lessons learned from his experience. Instead of focusing on fear, the program emphasized awareness, confidence, and community support. Students learned through interactive scenarios, role-playing, and age-appropriate discussions about personal safety. The coffee shop where Tommy had found refuge that day had started a nationwide movement. Businesses across the country were joining the Safe Haven program, placing special symbols in their windows to indicate that children could come inside if they felt threatened or unsafe. Staff members received training on how to respond to children in distress and how to quickly contact authorities. Detective Rodriguez's investigation had revealed another surprising element. The criminal network had been using social media to gather information about school routes and schedules. This discovery led to new guidelines for schools about what information could be shared online, and how to protect sensitive details about student transportation. Tommy had started working with child psychologists to develop ways to help other kids who had been through frightening experiences. His natural ability to connect with his peers, combined with his first-hand experience, made him uniquely qualified to help others process their fears and rebuild their confidence. The story took an unexpected turn when an anonymous donor, touched by Tommy's bravery, established a foundation in his name. The foundation would provide resources for schools to implement enhanced security measures and fund research into new technologies for student safety. The first grant had already been awarded to a small rural school district that couldn't afford to upgrade its bus security systems. International news outlets had picked up the story, leading to a global conversation about student transportation safety. Countries around the world were reaching out to learn more about the changes implemented in Tommy's community. What had started as a local incident was now influencing school safety protocols across continents. As summer vacation approached, Tommy's mom noticed subtle changes in her son. While he was still the same cheerful, kind-hearted boy, there was a new depth to him. He had learned that one person's actions, no matter how small they might seem, could create ripples of positive change that reached far beyond their own community. As summer began to fill the air with warmth, the ripple effects of Tommy's experience continued to create waves of positive change across the globe. The investigation had uncovered something nobody expected, a hidden network of brave children who had escaped similar situations but had been too scared to come forward. Their stories, inspired by Tommy's courage, were now helping authorities piece together a much larger picture. Detective Rodriguez sat in her office, surrounded by walls covered in photos and documents. The case had grown far beyond anything she had initially imagined. A map on her wall showed red pins marking similar incidents across multiple countries, all connected by thin red threads. Each pin represented a child who had faced a situation like Tommy's, and each thread led to another piece of the puzzle. The Tommy's Guardian app had gone viral in the tech world, earning recognition from major security firms. Silicon Valley executives were reaching out, offering resources and expertise to expand its capabilities. What started as a simple tracking system had evolved into a comprehensive safety platform that could predict and prevent potential threats before they occurred. One morning, Tommy's mom received an unexpected letter. It was from a grandmother in a small town thousands of miles away. Her grandson had used the safety techniques he'd learned from Tommy's viral video to escape a dangerous situation at a park. The letter was just one of hundreds that had begun pouring in, each sharing stories of how Tommy's experience had helped protect another child. The Safety Scouts program at Tommy's school had caught the attention of education experts nationwide. Child psychologists noted how the peer-led safety initiative had not only improved security but had also helped reduce bullying and increase overall student confidence. Schools across the country were now implementing their own versions of the program. Mrs. Wilson had been invited to speak at an international transportation safety conference. Her bus route had become a case study in effective community-based security. She shared how small changes, like her code word system and the buddy seating arrangement, had created an environment where children felt empowered rather than afraid. The coffee shop that had become Tommy's safe haven that fateful day had undergone a remarkable transformation. The owner had turned it into a training center for the Safe Haven program, teaching other business owners how to create secure spaces for children in crisis. The walls were now adorned with children's artwork, each piece telling a story of safety and community support. Tommy's story had caught the attention of child safety advocates in developing countries. A group of international NGOs had joined forces to create a global initiative called Safe Routes Worldwide. They were adapting the lessons learned from Tommy's experience to protect children in areas where school transportation safety was virtually non-existent. Detective Rodriguez's investigation led to another breakthrough when they discovered a pattern in how the criminal network communicated. They had been using seemingly innocent social media posts to share information about school routes and schedules. This discovery prompted a complete overhaul of how schools worldwide approached their online presence. The anonymous donor who had established Tommy's foundation came forward. It was a tech billionaire whose own child had once faced a similar situation. He pledged to match any donations made to the foundation, leading to an unprecedented surge in funding for school safety initiatives. The foundation was now able to help even the smallest, most remote schools implement modern security measures. Tommy himself had started working with a child psychologist to develop a series of animated videos about safety. The videos featured a character inspired by his experience, teaching other children about trusting their instincts and seeking help when needed. The series was being translated into multiple languages and distributed to schools worldwide. Officer Chen's training program had evolved into a full-fledged police academy course. She had developed new protocols for how law enforcement should approach cases involving children, emphasizing the importance of creating an environment where young victims felt safe coming forward. Her methods were being adopted by police departments across the globe. The Safe Routes Act had inspired similar legislation in countries around the world. Government officials from various nations were collaborating to create international standards for school transportation safety. Tommy's story had become a catalyst for global change in how societies approached the protection of their youngest members. The investigation took an unexpected turn when authorities discovered that several legitimate transportation companies had been unknowingly hired by the criminal network. This led to the development of new verification systems for contract workers in all industries that involve children, not just schools. Back in Tommy's community, the changes were most visible in the small, everyday moments. Children walked to their bus stops in groups, chatting and laughing but remaining aware of their surroundings. Parents took turns monitoring different areas, creating a network of watchful eyes that made everyone feel safer. The fear that had once gripped the community had been transformed into a powerful force for positive change. Mrs. Wilson noticed that her young passengers had developed a special kind of resilience. They weren't just following safety rules, they were actively looking out for each other. When a new student joined their route, the other children immediately included them in their safety buddy system, explaining the procedures with pride and confidence. 1 year had passed since that fateful afternoon when Tommy made his brave escape. The small town that had once been shaken by fear had transformed into a model of community safety and unity. As autumn leaves began to fall once again, the story was far from over. It had evolved into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Detective Rodriguez stood before an international conference of law enforcement officials, presenting the final results of her investigation. The criminal network had been completely dismantled, with over 200 arrests across 12 countries. Mr. Reynolds and his accomplices were facing lengthy prison sentences, but more importantly, their capture had led to the prevention of countless potential crimes against children. The Tommy's Guardian app had become the gold standard in school transportation safety. Now installed in buses across the world, it had already prevented dozens of attempted security breaches. Tech companies had continued to add new features, including an AI system that could detect unusual route patterns and alert authorities before any children were put at risk. Tommy's mom sat in her office at the newly established International Child Safety Center, surrounded by thank you letters from families around the globe. What had started as her personal mission to protect her son had grown into a worldwide movement. The center now provided resources and training to communities in over 50 countries, helping them implement their own safety programs. The Safety Scouts program had expanded beyond all expectations. What began in Tommy's school had spread to thousands of schools worldwide. Students were no longer just passive participants in their own safety, they had become active leaders in creating secure environments for themselves and their peers. The program had even been recognized by UNICEF as a model for child-led safety initiatives. Mrs. Wilson had retired from bus driving, but her legacy lived on. She now traveled the world, training other drivers in the safety protocols she had developed. Her simple code word system had been adopted by transportation systems everywhere, and studies showed it had contributed to a significant decrease in incidents involving school transportation. The coffee shop that had been Tommy's safe haven continued to play a crucial role in the community. It had become the first of over 10,000 safe haven locations worldwide. The owner had developed a comprehensive training program for businesses wanting to join the network, ensuring that children everywhere had access to secure spaces when they needed them. Tommy himself had grown too. Now 8 years old, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that inspired others. He still spoke at schools and safety conferences, but his message had evolved. Being brave isn't about not being scared, he would say. It's about knowing what to do when you are scared, and helping others know what to do too. The anonymous Tech Billionaires Foundation had exceeded all expectations. Through matching donations and strategic partnerships, it had raised over $100 million for child safety initiatives. The money was being used to implement security measures in underfunded schools, develop new safety technologies, and provide resources to communities that needed them most. Officer Chen's police training program had become mandatory for law enforcement agencies worldwide. Her emphasis on creating child-friendly environments and building trust with young people had revolutionized how police departments approached cases involving children. The coffee shop where she had helped Tommy that day had been preserved as a training location, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of community policing. The Safe Routes Act had inspired a United Nations resolution on child transportation safety. Countries around the world were now working together to create standardized safety protocols and share resources. The resolution, informally known as Tommy's Law, set new international standards for protecting children during their daily commutes. Detective Rodriguez's investigation had led to another unexpected development, the creation of an international database for tracking and preventing crimes against children in transportation systems. The database, maintained by Interpol, allowed law enforcement agencies to share information and identify patterns before they could develop into threats. Back in Tommy's community, the changes were most visible in the everyday moments. Children walked to their bus stops in groups, chatting and laughing but staying aware of their surroundings. Parents took turns monitoring different areas, creating a network of watchful eyes that made everyone feel safer. The fear that had once gripped the community had been transformed into a powerful force for positive change. The story had come full circle when Tommy's school held a special assembly to mark the one-year anniversary of his escape. Students from around the world joined via video conference to share how his experience had helped their communities become safer. The assembly ended with the unveiling of a new safety center named in Tommy's honor, dedicated to teaching children about personal safety and community awareness. As Tommy sat in Mrs. Wilson's old bus, now driven by a new driver who had graduated from her training program, he looked out at the familiar streets with new eyes. The town hadn't changed much on the surface, but underneath, everything was different. Every bus stop had its parent monitors, every business displayed its safe haven sign, and every child knew exactly what to do if they ever felt unsafe. The final piece of the story fell into place when the International Child Safety Center released its annual report. The statistics were clear: incidents involving school transportation had decreased by over 90% in communities that had implemented the safety measures inspired by Tommy's experience. His story had not just changed one community, it had created a blueprint for protecting children everywhere. As autumn turned to winter, Tommy's mom often found herself looking at old photos, marveling at how one terrifying afternoon had set in motion changes that would protect generations of children to come. The story that began with a brave boy's escape had become a powerful reminder that even the smallest actions could create waves of positive change that reached far beyond their original shores.